At 12:01 Eastern on Saturday, May 3rd, auto part tariffs officially went into effect, placing a 25% tariff on all auto parts that are imported into the United States. And unlike the previous tariff that went into effect last month, which affected all cars imported into the United States, a tariff that was avoidable for any automaker producing cars here on domestic soil, this new auto part tariff is very literally unavoidable. Because there is not a single, not one, car on the road today that is 100% American made, which means that every single car in existence is subject to these tariffs in some way, shape, or form. Now, Trump last week did announce a new discount policy, basically giving automakers a discount on this tariff if final assembly is here in the States. A discount that is based not only on the final assembly location for the vehicle, but also the total value of the car as well. But this discount isn't permanent and it will phase out over the next couple of years. But discount policy aside, this auto part tariff is huge, and automakers have said that the administration's tariff policy will cost them
billions and billions
of dollars. But auto part tariffs aren't the only thing that happened in the last couple of days. Because as of Monday of this week, so just a couple of days ago, student loans, specifically delinquent student loans, have officially begun to be collected on. A move that will impact millions of borrowers, as some studies show that as much as 25% of all student loan borrowers are past due. And the reason why I'm talking about this here is not only because both of these policies went into effect in the last couple of days, but also because both of these policies will absolutely have an impact on the car market. The tariffs for obvious reasons, because as tariffs are applied to vehicles, it causes the prices to go up and thus the affordability of those cars go down. And student loans, because as student borrowers are forced to pay, they have less disposable income to spend in other areas of their life, and thus vehicle demand will go down. And both of these events will absolutely cause for new and used car demand to go down as well. At the same time, mortgage demand is falling and mortgage applications dropped by 4% in the last week of April. GDP, or gross domestic product, fell by 0.3%, the first drop in 3 years. And grocery prices are up by 2.4% from a year ago, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The point is, things look bleak. Items and purchases have and will continue to go up in price and become more expensive. At the same time, disposable income for all of these different student borrowers is shrinking because now they're going to have to pay on their loans, or risk being forced to pay via garnishment or collections. And to me, this is a clear telltale sign that car demand is absolutely going to fall. There is truthfully no doubt in my mind. But one thing that we're already beginning to see is the impact that these tariffs and policy changes are having on different automakers. As we know, last week General Motors reported underwhelming earnings and forecasted massive losses due to tariffs. Stellantis reported terrible earnings as well and described these tariffs as a gut punch. And earlier this week, Ford reported their earnings and estimated that tariffs would cost the company $1.5 billion. Which, don't get me wrong, is an absolute ton of money, but what's really interesting is the fact that Ford is set to lose about $1.5 billion because of tariffs, and GM is going to be set to lose $4 to $5 billion because of tariffs. So the difference here is quite significant. GM is set to lose a lot more than Ford, and this is in large part due to the fact that Ford just produces more cars here in the United States. They have more final assembly here, and as a result, they are going to be less impacted by tariffs. They're also going to benefit more from this new discount policy. Now, when it comes to Ford earnings, they were actually quite good, and earnings per share exceeded expectations by over 500%. Yes, you heard that right, over 500%. Analyst expectations set earnings per share at about 2 cents, but in reality, they reported about 14 cents. The company also exceeded revenue expectations, but they did see a decline in profit year over year. But let's not forget that as we're sitting here today, we're reporting on Q1 profit and earnings numbers, which isn't reflective of anything that happened in regard to tariffs, at least not any of the negative impact. You see, in Q1 of this year, many consumers who may have bought a car, say in Q2, may have escalated those purchases to Q1 because of tariffs. So this coming quarter, Q2, will be the first quarter with tariffs active, and Ford, similar to General Motors and Stellantis, is beginning to set expectations. And while Ford, all things considered, did report strong Q1 earnings, they have suspended their expectations for the rest of 2025. And they're doing this while they begin the process of navigating tariffs, and by them making this decision, they're basically saying, hey, whatever we predicted for 2025 is most likely not going to end up happening, and we need to reevaluate, go back to the drawing board, and see what we can actually achieve this year. Companies adjust future forecasts all the time, both for the positive and for the negative, but the fact that Ford has just suspended their expectations and they're basically like, TBD, it definitely isn't a good thing for the company. Now, like many automakers, Ford has already begun to take actionable steps in order to decrease their tariff liability, with the CFO of Ford stating, "The vehicles being shipped to Canada from Mexico via the US are now being transported on bonded carriers so that they're not subject to US tariffs. That's similar to parts that merely pass through the US. We've done that as well. We've also stopped exporting vehicles to China, but we do continue to leverage China as a vehicle export hub to regions such as Australia, South America, and other areas where trade relations remain favorable as well." So at least based off of the CFO statement, it does seem as though there are some workarounds that automakers are using in order to limit tariff costs. But when it comes to how the rest of 2025 will play out, Ford has said that they will be reporting their expectations for the remainder of the year sometime this summer. And so it is safe to assume that Q2 and really the first few months of tariffs being implemented will be major in figuring out what exactly the company will do and what they'll need to do moving forward in the second half of the year. The unfortunate reality is that things really aren't looking good for the car market and for automakers, because not only is the US having to navigate these tariffs and all of the economic factors that are happening as well, but car markets across the world are also beginning to slow down. For example, Chinese demand for American-made cars has almost completely disappeared. You also have new car sales or new car registrations declining by 10% in the UK. And so while what many of you guys watching this channel and what myself are experiencing is very specifically a US problem, the truth is these automakers are dealing with worldwide hardships that are hurting the company across the board. And it's not a good look. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video is to largely just announce that these tariff and student loan policies have officially gone into effect. In previous months, some of these tariff policies have been a bit lofty at best. For example, back in April, Donald Trump announced the tariff policy, but then within a couple of days, he was beginning to change the rules on it due to backlash. For example, prior to these April tariffs being announced, they were originally supposed to be announced first in February, then in March, then finally in April. And as I mentioned a moment ago, whenever they were finally announced, they were kind of adjusted shortly after. And I think that there was a thought that maybe Trump and his administration would adjust this new set of tariff policies as well, but that hasn't really been the case except for those discounts announced last week. Now, I predict that we will really begin to see some real negative effects from these policies coming up this quarter, and I think specifically going into end of May, beginning of June. But I think even more than that, we'll begin to see the huge trickle-down effects in the second half of this year, so Q3 and Q4. This is a really tricky situation for anybody who's wanting to buy either a new or used car, because while neither the new or the used car market have been significantly impacted as I'm recording this video, which is at the beginning of May, I do think that the impacts will begin to show up. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I think by the end of 2025, they will be in full effect. However, where the difficulty of this situation comes into play is kind of twofold, because student loans are going to cause the demand in the new and used car market to go down, and thus that will drive prices down as well. But tariffs are, on the other hand, driving prices up because of the tariff costs. And so you sort of have to weigh out the balance between the two. Will slowing demand in the car market offset the cost of the tariffs? I don't know. And truthfully, I only think time will tell. The other thing that I think is incredibly important to note that I don't think as many people are talking about is that this auto parts tariff is absolutely going to impact the new car market and thus the used car market, but it's also going to impact people who are just wanting to keep their cars on the road. Because while these car parts are absolutely used for the production of the vehicles, they are also used for repairs and maintenance as well. Which means that if you're looking for a part for your vehicle that you need in order to repair it, you are looking at potentially spending 25% more on that part. So this is going to impact multiple facets of the car market, not just new vehicle sales and vehicle production. Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.